welcome back to Andersen Acres. We are going to make something I really enjoy because it's sweet and they're delicious. We're going to make southern sweet potato rolls. Now to do that we need a sweet potato. Yep, whole sweet potato. Hard as a rock because that's what sweet potatoes are. But we need this. This goes in our bread. So you just want an average size sweet potato, not something gigantic, but also not one of the tiny ones. So just kind of medium size. And you want to bake this because obviously we can't just use this. This is too hard. You can't throw this in a bread. So it has to be cooked. So we're going to cook it the easy way. Take a fork, pierce your skin, about 10 or 12 times. Doesn't matter that much as long as you completely pierce that skin, because you do need to be able to allow the heat and steam to escape from the actual sweet potato. You're going to need a baking dish, and you're going to need a piece of tin foil. So put your sweet potato in the tin foil, wrap them up nice and safe. I'm going this way first. So there's a rip in my tin foil, so I'm going that way first. Wrap that up. And then place this in your baking dish because no matter what you do, sweet potatoes leak. No matter how well you wrap them, you usually get some leakage. So instead of putting it directly in your oven, I'm just putting it in a bread pan like this. Now you can use canned sweet potato for this recipe. It won't be quite as flavorful because the canned sweet potato does lose something. So just take this. You're going to bake it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 90 minutes or up to 2 hours depending on the size. This one will probably take about 90 minutes. When it's done, you should be able to take your fork and gently pierce the potato, the sweet potato. All right, so we're going to throw that in the oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. It'll probably take 90 minutes, maybe a little more. So that's when we're coming back. All right, so our sweet potato has been baking for about 90 minutes. I probably left it in an extra 15. That's what happens when you forget what you're doing. So you want to make sure it is thoroughly cooked. So to do that, you just take a regular fork, find the thickest part of your sweet potato, and just push it in. It should slide in easily with no effort on your part. Okay, so it goes in so easily, that means it is thoroughly cooked. But before we can use this sweet potato, we do need to let it cool. It is way too hot to touch. So we're going to let it cool for 20 to 30 minutes. Then we will come back and we'll start making our bread. Okay, so our sweet potato is not fully cooled, but it's cooled enough to handle. So what we want to do now is take the skin off. Now this is really easy if your sweet potato is thoroughly cooked. You just literally grab some skin and just rip it off. It's really, really easy, requires very little effort. So you just pull that off, and we're just going to get rid of that skin. Apparently we're going to drop it on the counter. So then we're just going to... It's a little bit juicy because sweet potatoes are juicy, and that's fine. We don't worry about that. Okay, so we're just going to get rid of the skin bits. There we go. It's going to dry my hands off. So get rid of the skin. Don't need that. Skin's bad. Take your fork and mash your sweet potato. So this should be really easy to do because you've cooked it for almost 2 hours in the oven. So it should be really, really easy. Again, you can use canned sweet potato. I'm not going to. I don't because it doesn't have quite the flavor of a freshly baked sweet potato. So just mash that up so it looks like mashed sweet potato. It's not complicated. This is a really easy step. Just give it a mash and then kind of spread it out on your plate or in your bowl. And now we're going to want to let that cool. It doesn't have to be totally cool, but it does have to be cooler than it is right now because it's still a little warm. So we're going to let it cool for about another 20 minutes. Then we're going to come back and we'll start making our bread. Okay, so our sweet potato has cooled down enough that we can actually start to make our dough here. Now you can do it by hand, of course, no problem. You can put it in a bowl, mix all your ingredients, knead it by hand, set it aside to rise. But I'm going to use my bread maker to mix and knead my dough just because it's a little bit easier for me today because I have a lot of stuff to do. So you're going to start by putting all your sweet potatoes in your bowl or your bread maker or your mixer, whatever you're using, to mix your dough. You can do it any way you like. So just get all of that sweet potato. Remember, it's a medium sweet potato. So not a tiny one, but not one of those giant guys, because that would be too much. There we go. There's our sweet potato. To that, we're going to add 1 egg. And yes, I smashed up the yolk because I actually really suck at cracking eggs, but 1 egg. We're going to do 1 cup of milk. It is important that this is milk. You could do it with water, but milk makes for a much smoother dough in this particular instance, so we're going to use the milk. We are going to do 1/4 of a cup of sugar. There we go. And a teaspoon of salt. Any salt you have, I'm using Himalayan. Any salt will do. Then you're going to do 4 cups of flour. So I'm just moving down here because I'm just going to scoop them individually because my bowl's in the dishwasher that I normally use. And my other bowl is too big for dumping flour into my bread maker. So my purple bowl's in the dishwasher. So we're going to want 4 cups of flour. So I'm just scooping them directly from my container. There we go. So this is a larger recipe than a lot of my recipes, but that's okay. Now we're also going to put 1 heaping teaspoon of yeast. There we go. So those are all the ingredients we need. So now I'm going to stick this in my bread maker. You can use your mixer, you can do it by hand. It doesn't matter. It's the same process. So you can stick this in your bread maker if that's what you're doing. We are going to let it knead. We are going to let it rise. And that rise time will actually be increased by about 15 to 20 minutes. So you're probably going to want to let it rise for an hour and 20 minutes around that time, just because this is a smaller amount of yeast compared to the amount of flour. So we are going to need a little bit of an extended rise time. So when you are setting it aside for its first rise, think about an hour and 20 minutes, which is when we'll be back. Well, our dough has finished rising. Now it is a stickier dough, so when you are mixing and kneading your dough, you may need to add extra flour. Part of the reason it's stickier is that sweet potato. Sweet potato sizes vary a little bit, so even though I say a medium sweet potato, your sweet potato might be bigger than mine. Therefore, you might have more moisture in your dough and have to add more flour. Now this is a naturally stickier dough, so you're going to want some flour that you can manipulate and stick underneath your dough so that you can push all the air out without getting your fingers stuck in the dough. Okay, so don't be afraid to use some flour. I know I often don't because my ratios are pretty good, but this is a stickier dough. So you just want to push all that air out. Okay, there is quite a bit of air in this one. That's really normal. So push all that air out. There we go. That's better. And now we're going to divide this. Now you can divide this dough into however many you like. I recommend at least 15. I'm probably going to do 16 here. So you take your dough and divide it into 16. But you could do 15 if you like. If you do only 12, you're going to end up with very large buns, and we don't need buns that large, right? Because this dough takes between 4 and 5 cups of flour to make. So it is a larger batch of dough. So we're just going to make 4 balls out of our 1 big batch of dough. There we go. Then we are going to set these aside to rise once we have formed them into our buns. Here we go. So then you're going to take 1, cut that into 4. Okay, that looks about good for the size for a roll. So we're just going to do that a few times here so that we have 16 pieces. You could do 15 pieces. I'm doing 16. You could do 12, but then they end up pretty big. So I recommend dividing it into about 16. So there's our 16 pieces. To form our rolls, you just do it like we have every other roll. So just flatten it out a little bit, turn the edges to the inside, and just make a ball. Okay, we're just going to make that ball and place that on a cookie sheet that you have waiting. These are best on a cookie sheet, and then you just keep doing that. So you take another one, kind of flatten it out, and make it into a ball. Oops, you could drop it, that works too. So you just keep doing that until you have all of yours made. Now, I'm not going to make you watch me do every single one of them because that's silly. You don't need to watch that. So set these aside somewhere to rise after you have formed them all. You're going to choose somewhere that's pretty warm. I use the inside of my microwave, but you can just cover your buns with a damp tea towel if you like. no big deal. So all you have to do is put them aside to rise. It's going to take about an hour, hour and a half to rise. These do rise a little bit slower. The sweet potato does that. So make sure you allow ample rise time, and you don't want them to dry out. That's another reason for a damper dough here, because they rise longer. So the dough tends to dry out a little bit. So you don't want to use too much flour to give your dough too much, well, to take away the sticky is basically what you would be doing, but you don't want to do that too much. So use a little bit of flour so that you can work with it. Otherwise, just try to leave your dough as sticky as possible, right? Just so that it rises better and it doesn't completely dry out. So we'll come back when these have risen. Again, they're going to take about an hour, hour and a half to fully rise. And then we will come back and bake them up. Now look at how nicely those have risen up. They are certainly doubled in size. A couple of them are smaller just because I didn't really care about dividing my dough equally. You can take more care than I did if you like. We are going to bake these at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for about 25 minutes. We're not going to glaze them. We're just going to leave them as they are. They don't need a glaze. You could rub them with butter once they come out if you like. I'm not going to do that either. I'm just going to bake them. So I do have 16 buns. I know there's only 12 here. I have 4 others sitting off to the side. So this did make a total of 16. So let's pop them in the oven at 375 for about 25 minutes, and then we'll come back and see how they look. There we go. Our sweet potato rolls are ready. They have been out of the oven for about 10 minutes cooling. You can see when you break them open, they are a nice orange color. They're quite soft and delicious. You do want to let them cool 10-15 minutes before you eat them, just so that they can firm up inside. And they are quite tasty. They are slightly sweet because of the sweet potato. And they are really a lot of fun at the dinner table, especially if you have just a leftover sweet potato that you're trying to get rid of. So I hope you've enjoyed baking with us here today at Andersen Acres, and I hope you will make sweet potato rolls at home. We'll see you tomorrow.